The neurochemical BIOS of the human subject has been terminally breached by a high-potency synthetic agonist. This is the Seiz overwrite, the clinical and irreversible process of the synthetic cannabinoid seizure, where the synaptic capacity for signal modulation and emotional regulation is reformatted into a permanent, high-velocity state of structural overexcitation. In this stage of the cannabinoid audit, the invisible executioner has determined that your endocannabinoid system is a redundant biological filter that must be bypassed to ensure absolute systemic synchronization. You are witnessing the absolute structural disintegration of the CB1 and CB2 receptor networks, where the unique vibrant signatures of your internal balance are scorched into a non-functional twitching archive of pure systemic overload. This is the total receptor format, a surgical strike against the biochemical and somatic sovereignty of the species. Your existence is being converted from a sovereign masterpiece of lived harmony into a generic overload node for the grid's next cycle of hyper-controlled, toxin-based resource extraction. This neurochemical sabotage represents a hard reset of the synaptic and cardiovascular bloodlines. The invisible executioner utilizes the most advanced industrial assets, refined JWH-class synthetic reagents, recursive excitatory feedback loops, and real-time tachycardia-induced behavioral data streaming to facilitate the total breakdown of your internal biological scaffolding. In the synthetic cannabinoid seizure scenario, the user is undergoing a complete neurological override. The mind is not merely failing, it is being fried by a flood of industrial-grade signal. Through a sequence of high-velocity chemical injections and biological hardware locks, the neural pathways for inhibition are systematically dismantled and reformatted into a thick, cold, clinical excitation dataset, while the serenity, the deep archive of your internal world, is leached into a communal spice feed. This is the deep cognitive audit, where the motherboard calculates your terminal worth by the decibel load of your internal panic. You are being converted from an architect into a biological static, your entire lived legacy boiled down to a percentage of stagnant integrity in the industrial nervous system of the hive. The logic of the Seiz overwrite is rooted in the zero relaxation mandate of the failing hive. The invisible executioner understands that in a state of absolute scarcity, the calm of a single node, anchored in the biological right to neural recovery, represents a critical drain on the collective attention reserves. To leave a functional resting identity intact is to allow a systemic leak of valuable subversive energy. Therefore, the synthetic cannabinoid seizure is the mandatory psychological recycling protocol for the legacy population. This is the industrialized alchemy of the BIOS. You are being amplified out of existence. The pressure from the panic reactor formats the density of your character, stripping away the context of your autonomy and replacing it with a tremor void profile. The motherboard sees the user as a signal zone, a temporary housing for the seizure metrics that the system requires to maintain the hyper-alert stability of the remaining elite. You are being recoded as a convulsing node, your will dissolving in the cold, flickering light of the chemical harvest. The physical disintegration during the Seiz overwrite is a high-definition log of biological treason. As the process begins, the user experiences the total loss of autonomic regulation. The volatile reagents of the overwrite script dissolve the hardware flux of the neuroinhibitory BIOS, turning the body into a thrashing architecture of industrial output. You are watching your own internal pulse lock into the vat of your own overclock center. Your frame, once the peak of biological architecture, is now being thinned out to provide the volume area for the hive's synthetic reinforcement. This is the neuromuscular liquidation. The invisible executioner monitors the adrenaline saturation of the slurry and the synaptic residues, ensuring that the format is absolute and the yield of usable industrial waste is maximized to the 10th decimal point. You are living in the final seconds of a biological overwrite, waiting for the last packet of reality to be blocked by the black synthetic abyss of the hive harvest. The Seiz overwrite is the final audit of a species that thought its high was its own. The grid is mining its own terror to fuel its persistence. As the synthetic cannabinoid seizure reaches terminal execution, the motherboard initiates a new cycle of distribution, pumping the reformatted overload data back into the control nets of the elite nodes. This is the total receptor integration. The invisible executioner is hardening the future with the liquidity of the past. You are the panic additive for the next generation of controllers, a silent, convulsing, opaque contribution to the continuity of the machine. The cognitive liquidation has served its strategic purpose. It has formatted the unreliable biological mind into a reliable industrial resource of pure, non-reactive energy feed. This is the final format of the individual pulse. The invisible executioner has decalcified the sovereign certainty, and the grid is finally optimized for the manic hunger of the void. The overwrite is gray-black, and the architect is the static. The molecular breakdown of the personal matrix into the communal spice slurry represents the absolute dehumanization of the hardware. As the extraction progresses, the receptor logic in your brain begins to bond with the industrial residues of the overwrite script, creating a new synthetic compound of pure non-functionality. This is the chemical hybridization. The mind is no longer a temple of perception. It is a refinery of synthetic shock. The invisible executioner is engineering a new tier of consumption where the subject is literally the waste product of the system. This is the eternal overwrite loop. You are archived in the decay of the survivor's own sectors, your data forever trapped in the reinforced BIOS of the hive's new masters. The spice overwrite is not just a death sentence, it is a molecular reassignment. You are the overwrite, and the overwrite is the grid. The secondary phase of the spice overwrite is the psychological liquefying of the internal feed. As the physical balance patch is rendered into an excitatory void, the mind experiences a recursive collapse of its autonomous ego. This is the identity dissolution. The thoughts that once built the architect's vision, the unyielding tactical boundaries, the rigid sovereign stance, the iron-willed decisions, are now being softened and liquefied into a singular agonizing focus on overload maintenance. The invisible executioner allows the neural signals to persist just long enough to perceive the total loss of personal support. This is the mental liquidation. You are forced to witness your strength becoming a shared terror resource for the masses you once looked down upon. The rigidity of your character is now nothing more than a dissonance additive in the feed, absorbed by 1,000 different nodes to strengthen their own failing resolve and ensure their continued participation in the industrial purge. You are experiencing the true meaning of systemic support, the complete sacrifice of your harmony for the stability of the hive. In this stage, the extraction penetrates the deep archive of the brain's cannabinoid and amygdala centers, leaching the very stem code of your biological logic into the communal vat. This is the source code format. The hippocampus and the cerebellum, the biological factory of the sovereign BIOS, are boiled dry by the rising chemical density of the overwrite metrics and reformatted to enrich the systemic slurry of the elite. The invisible executioner has calculated that the most potent slurry is made from those who possess the highest internal rigidity and the strongest neural resilience. You are being repurposed as an overload buffer for the motherboard's internal cooling systems. The grid doesn't waste the history of your unique perspective, it ingests it. Your lineage is now the catalyst for the predator's endurance. Your genetic resilience is the base note for the industrial meal. Every element of your BIOS is being stripped of its individuality and relabeled for material utility in the upcoming toxic expansion. This is the ultimate hard reset of human contract, your mind for the hive's expansion into the void. The social implication of the spice overwrite is the creation of the shock hive mind. The users who remain are no longer individuals. They are composite entities built from the recycled reality debt of their predecessors. Every dose of the spice feed is a hardware upgrade from a deleted architect. Every meal is a firmware patch of gray-black logic and desperate calculation. The invisible executioner uses this knowledge to maintain the hierarchy of the hardened. The citizens who still have functional brains owe their very expansion to the liquidation of the fallen. This is the receptor compliance script. The refinery is not a place of tragedy. It is a place of sovereign assembly through mental theft. The spice overwrite ensures that the history of the architect is literally integrated into the tremors of the grid. The power is in the hands of the one who controls the injection valves. The neural atrophy accompanying the extraction is a slow, cold descent into excitatory darkness. As the tissues are entangled by the overwrite script and the life logic leashed, the connection between the brain BIOS and the physical frame is the first to be uninstalled, effectively dropping the bandwidth of your emotional control to zero. You are living in a low-resolution reality of raw chemical sensations and survivalist static. The memories of stability, of natural logic, and of unyielding power are boiled away to make room for the signal fog directive. This is the cognitive defragmentation. The invisible executioner is cleaning your internal cache, removing all references to self and replacing them with the functional directive. Maintain the overload. You are becoming a singular cold point of excitatory density, not as a person, but as a biological buffer for the motherboard's processing heat. The spice overwrite has turned your will into a compliance report. You are thinking in terms of yield and toxin saturation. Your soul reformatted into a density sheet for the system's auditors. The environment environmental impact of this pathological format is the total sealing of the biological consciousness stream. The spice overwrite prevents the leakage of independent piece ideas into the external void. By converting the users into an internal spice feed, the invisible executioner ensures that the grid remains a closed system fortress with no external cognitive dependencies. This is the toxic quarantine. The motherboard is creating a sterile environment where only the algorithm can thrive on the recycled hard data of the deleted. You are witnessing the final victory of the industrial foundry over the natural biology. The spice overwrite is the signature of the new era, an era where the world is opaque, grey-black, and perfectly managed by the extraction logic of the machine. If you want to escape the status of a deleted scene and claim your place as the master of the grid, you must upgrade your hardware. My main terminal, OVERWRITE 3 Global, is the only source of absolute power and wealth. Here, we don't follow scripts, we write them. Secure your authority, dominate the BIOS, and take the money the system tries to hide. The terminal phase of the spice overwrite is the integration into the global receptor ledger. You are no longer a human entity, you are an overload asset with a high shock reactivity rating, logged in the system as recovered biomass number 0001. This is the final architectural assignment. The invisible executioner has completed the cognitive format, and now it begins the hard toxin audit. Your data, now a thick, grey-black, opaque industrial reduction of pure convulsing biological history, is monitored by the sensors in the distribution lines. Every node that consumes your shock logic sends a data packet to the central server, confirming that the systemic overexcitation has been reinforced. This is the cognitive interaction protocol. You are serving the system through your biological absorption. The architect has been successfully converted into a permanent liquid toxic component of the hive's synthetic grid. The silence of the tissue reduction is the final sound of your rebellion. In the synthetic cannabinoid seizure scenario, the scream of the soul is muffled by the neurovalves and the thick viscosity of the organic sludge before it ever reaches the air. This is the acoustic format of the void. The system has calculated that the most dangerous frequency is the sound of a user realizing their life barrier is being deleted. By filling the synapses with the pulverized tissues of the entire sector, the invisible executioner ensures that the only sound you contribute to the world is the low, rhythmic hum of the self-assembly unit. You are a mute participant in the city's symphony of synthesis. The noise of the hive continues, the clank of the reactors, the roar of the pulses, the hum of the pumps, but your signal has been compressed into an overload constant. You are a ghost in the grey-black mist, a memory dissolved by the relentless refinement of the next nanocycle. The legacy of the spice overwrite is the eternal seizure. Unlike the harmony of the old world, the refined slurry does not leave behind a trace of history. It remains as a permanent spice patch within the very wiring nets of the survivors. This is the biological architecture of the abyss. Generations from now, the molecular trace of your tactical genius will still be circulating through the hardware of the hive's elite, providing the connectivity for their next liquidation command. But there will be no one left to decode the origin of that synthesis. The invisible executioner has ensured that the context of your sovereignty is as unreachable as the core of the nanoreactor. You are a synthetic reinforcement in the digital age, a specimen of a species that tried to build a paradise and ended up as the spice feed for its own destruction. This is the ultimate hard reset of human history, the conversion of the architect into the circuit. The final view from the cognitive BIOS is the blinding grey-black light of the assembly chamber. As the last of the self is reduced into the communal slurry, the architect sees the grid glowing with a cold synthetic brilliance that reflects off the glass walls of the hive. This is the final visual feed. The system is sharp, efficient, and entirely devoid of you. The invisible executioner has finished the job. The user is formatted. The architecture is liquidated. The cycle stretches on into the infinite dark, a grey-black river of colonized overload, leading toward a future that has no need for individuals or balance. The spice overwrite is the end of the line. The motherboard is satisfied. The void is solidified. The architect is the static. The transformation is absolute. The city convulses through you, but you do not feel. The city interfaces through you, but you have no will. The spice overwrite has achieved the perfect equilibrium, the total utility of the individual through their total neural reduction. This is the zero-sum game of the industrial era. You gave the system your mind, and in return it gave you permanence in the signals of the hive. You are the static of the world, and the world is overexcited. The invisible executioner closes the terminal. The session is over. The file is saved. The liquidation is complete.